Hey everybody, this is Emily and you're watching Stitched Together Fiber Arts. Today's video is going to be about troubleshooting a warp. A few weeks ago, actually if you look closely at the video you'll see pumpkin, so it was last fall. A few weeks ago we'll call it, I was working on a double length warp. I wanted to make 2 scarves from one warp, and in the process of putting all that yarn onto the rigid Heddle Loom, I ran into a few problems and a few entertaining experiences. So let's see what happens. This was a really long warp to create. As you can see, almost it stretches from one side of my living room, I'm right up against the closet door here, all the way to the other side there, and I barely had time to squeeze behind the project as I was working. And of course, as I was doing so, I discovered, oops, that I had started warping for just one side of the loom rather than putting it down the middle like I'd intended. So the first trouble I encountered was having to move over what I had worked on. Let's take a look at how that process went. So I ended up deciding that it was easier to just move over each of the warp threads, and rather than trying to redo the whole thing. And even though it's a slightly slow and aggravating process, it is working out a little more easily, and I'm just cutting them off of the other warp, and I've moved them over approximately as far as I think they'll need to go in order to get to this side, to the part of the loom that I think they'll be on for the finished scarf, which, you know, you want it to be balanced on your back apron rod here. So that's why I am moving them all over so that they're going to be more properly centered for where I want to put them in the final work. Now, there are some annoyances like, oh, that one fell. So I'm going to go grab this one, and I'm going to snip this next one here carefully. Okay, so I'm going to lay that one there to get it out of the way while I move these 2 over. And I'll just tie them on and keep going. Oops, so I guess one of the risks in moving over all my warps is that I've ended up with a slot that is not filled. Do you see it? Yeah, there it is. So I happen to have these 2 danglers, and I'm just going to take those danglers and thread them through now so that everything can be in place. Okay. I don't know if I can do this while holding my phone. That's an interesting question. Yeah, probably not. That's okay. We're just going to go with it. You guys can get all kinds of little hooks at my yarn. Okay. So I'll just tie that on, and you know, while we're looking at this is some Handspun that I made many years ago, and it's merino, and I just love how the slugs in the light blue kind of match the darker blue there. So I'm really looking forward to spinning this up and seeing how it's going to come out, especially with these specks of like orange and green and some other colors that are coming through. So here's my redone warp, and oh, one thing I kind of forgot was that I'm trying not to have to show you my kids' stuff in the background, the Legos. One has ended up being shorter over here. The new warps are shorter than the original one because I was trying to make a double length warp, and I had my loom pulled all the way back up against the wall. But obviously I forgot that I was doing that. So we're going to end up with a slightly shorter warp as a result of rearranging everything, but that's okay. There's also a fair bit of yarn on the floor from cutting all the pieces off, which I'm going to have to clean up a bit like a yarn studio. That's all right. I do have a few more inches left to tie on, and that's okay. I'm going to work on that now. So I am done with this warp, and here's the cool wee looking down the warp shot with Legos in the background. But I really like how everything is spaced out for the colors, and you know, there are parts that are more taut, so that is going to be an issue, and I've definitely ended up with, you know, a foot or even 2 feet less, maybe more than 2 feet less space for my less length for my warp than I thought I would have, which is unfortunate. So I'm just going to use a tape measure when I'm weaving, and I will use that to figure out what I can make, but more on that later. Okay, so you can see we have my tensioning bars set up here, and I mean, really, I just use a rubber band, and they're barely held on. I do the best I can, but what I've noticed is, and this is really annoying, that some of the warp threads are actually getting tangled up as they go. So I am finding that as I am tensioning this, I have to go through and actually straighten them out. And as I'm doing that, I'm also just kind of checking to make sure that everything is lined up well. And you know, I'm just trying to avoid problems later on. So, all right, now that I have gotten everything back in its proper place, I am going to go back to winding this on. So, look, after winding that on, just 2 minutes later, I discovered that I had forgotten to put in the next piece of paper. So I've had to unwind my warp, and now I'm going to gently feed this paper in, but I have to do that with 2 hands. So I don't think I can do that without turning off the video. Okay, so after putting in that piece of warping paper, you can just see it here. And I just use actually paint paper that you can lay down when you're painting instead of using a drop cloth, and I've cut that into strips, and I find that works really well to pack a warp. So before winding this one, I just gave everything a yank, and I'm just trying to make sure that the tension is evened up again as much as possible. And make sure that on over there, that these little bars are not falling off. Nothing is twisted up here in the front. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. Oh, no, we're not. That's not cold. Okay. Especially kind of like to give a tug to the thinner ones, because they have a tendency to get to lose tension for me. So that's just something I know to do. Alright, this is kind of clattery, so I'm going to turn this off for a minute. There it is. The warp is now all threaded through, and it's ready to be tied onto the front beam. I got 2 gorgeous woven items out of this, a scarf and a cowl, because of the slightly shorter length. But I'll save that discussion of how I made those and how I finished them up for another video. Until later, happy stitching.